Does card grading add value? Dealer, collector, and investor talk about that next.
I've said I'm not going to be grading a lot of cards in the future.
He wanted to move forward to sell these sets. I'm like, oy vey, I gotta go back, I gotta look at all the sets super close. But then he reminded me, each of the sets had 10 or 20 or 25 of the key cards graded.
And there are a ton of sets that these grading companies just do not want to grade, which sucks.
I prefer to just buy it ungraded. As long as the dealer lets me examine it, look at it, smell it.
All right, welcome back. This is episode 8, the last episode in this series. I hope you guys went back, saw the other episodes in the series, and have enjoyed it so far. If you haven't, I'll have the link down below to the other episodes. And also, as always, I'm going to have the links to the other YouTube channels of the guys who answer these questions. At minimum, please go and subscribe to those guys' channels. They have great channels, and they produce some great content and are just great people for the hobby. So please check out their channels down below. So let's get into it. Does card grading add value? I think this is an interesting question for this time period, because a lot of people feel right now that we're in a junk slab era, and cards are going to PSA, to SGC, to CGC, and cards are getting graded by the millions now. You know, you could almost joke around, is there more cards graded than not graded at this point? Which obviously isn't true, but you know, with all this grading happening, does it reach a point where a lot of people go the opposite direction, right? They would actually rather buy the cards ungraded, and that actually is added value to them. And I think we've seen that movement. You know, some people are starting to buy the Mag Pros and, you know, grade the cards themselves. And I think that's a great option for people. And my curiosity is, do we see more and more people going that route? My concern is, if I go to a card show and there's a high-end card there and I'm interested in it and it's not graded, my concern is, what is wrong with it, you know? And most people would say, well, you should be an expert on cards, you should be able to look at it, you should be able to know if there's something wrong with it. But I will admit, I don't take a tape measure with me to card shows. I probably should. So it could be trimmed, it could be minimum size, and that dealer could have broke it out of that slab, and that's why he's selling it ungraded, right? So I think we're going to get to that tipping point soon where if you see an ungraded card, you know, red flags go up. You know, why is it ungraded, right? But I've also seen that, you know, I've bought cards ungraded on eBay, I've done SGC returns, and I've seen where it's increased the value of my cards. Pretty much every time I do an SGC return on the channel, I show if it was a positive or a negative as far as value added from that grading experience. So when I hear these questions like, does grading add value, I think about it from my own lens, and I think a lot of you guys out there probably do too. And my lens is very focused on collecting vintage. But if I go to the flip side, if I collected modern and I was answering this question, my answer might be totally different. You know, I hear friends all the time that collect modern. I just bought this PSA 9 for cheaper than buying a raw one, right? And it's like, what? PSA 9, that's a mint card. Like, why is that cheaper than a raw, right? But then I see the grading reveals, and, you know, they expect like a 50% gem rate or even higher on the modern cards. So sometimes, you know, you question, you're like, well, that PSA 9, it's cheaper than actually the grading price. It's like under $20 for that card. Why did he even send it in to get graded? Oh, he sent it in because if he got a 10, he could have sold it for 40 or 50. I'm obviously pro grading. I grade a lot of my cards, but that equation really doesn't add up to me. Going back to an episode we did earlier about oversized, I have a lot of oversized Clemente items that aren't graded. And the main reason is SGC, it's around $50 to grade them. PSA, it's around $40 to get them graded. And that's not even including, the shipping costs back and forth and things like that. So for me, it doesn't make sense to buy a $30 oversized card, to pay $50 to get it graded. So to pay more to get it graded than I paid for the actual, item itself. And now it's worth $35. It's worth less than 30. I guess it depends on the grade I get, but sometimes that equation just doesn't make sense, right? So even though I'm pro grading overall, I don't send all my cards in to get graded. And that's one of the reasons when I do a grading reveal video, a lot of times I'm showing a positive gain. It's like, to me, it's like almost at school doing an open book test, right? I know what I feel like the card's grade should be from looking at it, right? I know what a card in that grade sells for. And then as long as I maybe take a grade or two off and I do the math in my head, I can, in most cases, come out with a positive when it comes to sending that card in to get graded. Now, the counterpoint to that is if somebody says, if you're collecting for the long term and you're planning on having these cards for 20, 30 years down the road, well, you just spent hobby money on grading. And I get that point. That's a fair point also. All right, so that's enough of my thoughts on the topic. I really want to get to the panel's thoughts. Before I do want to say, if you're not subscribed to Mookie Chilson's channel, I think you should be. I'm going to put his channel down below also on this last episode. Mookie is such a great friend. He's been a sounding board for me throughout this series with just different things that I've asked him, different questions, different suggestions, and he's been awesome. So please check out Mookie Chilson's channel. And without further ado, the question today is very plain and simple. Does grading add value? Does card grading add value? And thank you so much for anybody who's watching these videos or commented. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed this last episode.
I think the simple answer is yes in most cases, but the person has to be smart when sending in cards. Now, you have to analyze your card and kind of make a prediction on what it would grade. Now, how I view it is like, let's say, for example, I have a card that I know I'm going to send to SGC. SGC is $15, and I think it could grade anywhere from a 4 to a 6. At 4, I break even. 5, I make a little bit of money. 6, I make even more money. I'm going to send in that card, right? Maybe if it comes back at 3 or 4, I lose a little bit of money. But statistically looking at it, if I think it has a higher chance at a 5 or a 6, I think it's worth a shot to getting graded. Now, grading in general isn't always about the monetary return. People have sentimental cards they do want to get graded and different things like that, or build out a set. But I think if you're smart about grading, there's a lot of different ways to make money. Also, on the flip side of the coin, let's talk about when card companies start grading sets. So I collect a lot in the non-sports space, especially vintage non-sports, foreign non-sports. And there are a ton of sets that these grading companies just do not want to grade, which sucks. It's bad for the collector. But at the end of the day, it's their decision, it's their company. But these companies do change their mind, right? So sometimes you'll see a set that's been rejected multiple times over the years and someone gets it graded and now everyone can get their cards graded. Well, there's two interesting things on that because the raw card values for those sets, as soon as a grading company says, hey, we're grading these cards, the values go up because collectors will buy those cards just to get them slabbed. There's people out there that do not want to have raw cards. And I know it seems like a shock, especially to the vintage side. Like most vintage collectors enjoy raw cards. There are people that just want to have graded cards in their collection for whatever reason. They want to have it authenticated. They want to have a grade assigned to it. And that's how they want to store it. They don't want to store raw cards. So you have that part of the hobby that just wants graded cards. So on the raw side of things, right, if the set isn't allowed to be graded, there's just not as much interest in those cards. As soon as they can get graded, people buy them up, they get them graded. So I think the grading can add value in multiple perspectives, right? Cards that weren't specifically being able to get graded, if they become graded, the value rises. In a modern side of things, I would say like the star cards of Michael Jordan. I'm sure those have gone up quite a bit since PSA has been grading them, although I don't know how much raw cards are out there. And then again, on vintage like non-sports, Additionally, right, if you take a look at cards, $15, $20, $25, whatever it costs for grading, especially at the time of this video, this grading prices change quite a bit. There's value plays on there if you are smart about it.
So I did a video about this just recently about myself where I've said I'm not going to be grading a lot of cards in the future. That was very pointed towards like a big part of my collection, which is 90s cards, King Griffey cards, things that are more modern, and things from like, let's say anything from like the 1970s to now. That is where I don't see a lot of value being driven by grading, because you generally have to get a PSA 10 to move the needle at all. So you're wasting a lot of money. And I saw this, with the last 3 or 4 subs I put in. You just spend a lot of money to have the cards graded, some cases non-fairly. I've had cards I've resubmitted that were 6s that became 10s, things like that. And how does that happen? And to me, you're just wasting a lot of money trying to chase one grade, which is the 10. Now let's go back to the vintage card side of it. If you're collecting vintage cards, it does make a sense to have the cards graded to a certain extent, because if you're going to move, and this goes for both modern and vintage, if you're going to move those cards and sell them, it's much easier graded, right? So it's already been established. If you're going to sell, if you're going to flip, you're going to sell, you're not really into collecting, then grade, because you won't not be able to sell online and get the prices you would normally get unless you're a few dealers we all know that sell really well online raw. It's hard to do. Now, if you're going to do some of this stuff, grade to flip and sell and buy, then that's also important, because that's maximizing your money. But as a collector, chasing the 10 for cards outside of really vintage is, you're just going to lose money. For the vintage guys, the big thing here is that you are starting at a baseline, right? We just, in the question before, I talked about how there's a range of value inside of one grade in terms of what they sell for, right? We talked about the PSA 4 Clemente rookie card has a $3,000 gap between the lowest and the highest sale that's been recently done. And a lot of that's driven by the visual eye appeal. So the challenge there in the old days, and I think this could come back to haunt us a little bit, is that high-end PSA 4 at one point was sold to us in the 90s as near mint, right? It looks like a near mint card. It's got a little back scratch. It's got a little bit of a wax stain. It's got a little bit of a wrinkle, but everything else is perfect. And those cards were sold for a long time as near mint or mint cards to collectors. PSA SGC came around and said, no, wait a minute, there's a big issue with that card. It's actually a beautiful card, but it's only a 4 or a 5. So having that baseline to know, like, this card is beautiful, but there's something wrong with it, right? And I'm just going to say, as a collector, I don't want cards with big major problems for the most part. I don't want to pay $50,000 for a card to find out later it has a back crease, it has a crease that's been spooned out, it's got something really wrong with it, and I paid top dollar for it. That is terrible for everyone. That's basically being scammed. So I think there is a point where grading does provide value, but I don't think people are going to use it like they did in the old days, where a 4 is a 4, a 5 is a 5, a 6 is a 6. Now, there's going to be this range of grades, and the lower on the scale you go, that range is probably going to get wider and wider as collectors make the decision how much they want to overpay based on the eye appeal of that card. So the lower the grade, actually, that range is there. I think the higher end of the grade, you're chasing those high-end grades to get that lock-in value, but I think right now it's showing it's really hard to get those high-end grades. I think right now I'm choosing not to do a lot of grading. I haven't graded in over a year with anyone. So I got a giant stack of cards here that I may grade one day, but right now I'm putting things in holders and just kind of holding on.
Short answer, yes. But you put explain. I mean, if you go to the root of grading, third-party authenticators, that's what it was for, authentication. At least at least the hobby in general has deemed PSA, SGC, third-party authenticators, we trust their judgment. You could agree or disagree. Sometimes ignorance is bliss, but as long as it's in the slab, they're saying it's real. So of course, that in itself is value. As a collector, I feel safer buying a graded card online, but if I'm at a show, I prefer to just buy it ungraded. As long as the dealer lets me examine it, look at it, smell it. But yeah, of course, the easy answer is always yes. Grading adds value. The caveat is it has to be by an authenticator deemed worthy by the masses, the PSAs, the SGCs, what's the comic book one, CGC, you know. There's tag grading, there's Arena Club now, or Arena Grade, I don't know, the one that Jeter's with. I'm sure Fanatics is gonna come up with a grading company. So as long as it's PSA, SGC, CGC, the big monsters in the room, there's always gonna be value. As a collector, I like graded when I'm buying online, or if I'm doing a deal via cell phone or Facebook. At least I know what I'm getting. They can't hide flaws or anything like that, because you know, we know the grading scale. If you've been in the game long enough, you know the grading scale, you know the definitions of each grade, so you know what to expect. If you're buying ungraded or raw online, then there's a lot of risk. So that in itself is value.
I think that's a really easy question. It adds value in a variety of ways. It adds value because if you take a card that's in really nice condition and it gets a high grade on it, you're typically going to more than cover easily the grading costs. Therefore, you are creating value with grading. I would also argue that if you are doing something for posterity or to remember something from your childhood, not necessarily the grade of the card, but having that card encapsulated in the plastic with some sort of grade, basically guaranteeing you that it's authentic, that you know it's approximately an 8 out of 10. I think there's a lot of peace of mind that comes with that, and I think that there's added value there. But there's also added value, and I just had this happen to me recently as I was buying a collection. So I was buying a collection in the Midwest of vintage sets, and I'd only seen these sets very briefly. You know, I'd flipped through them super fast, and the gentleman had contacted me after I had met with him to let me know that he wanted to move forward to sell these sets. I'm like, oy vey, I gotta go back, I gotta look at all the sets super close. But then he reminded me, each of the sets had 10 or 20 or 25 of the key cards graded. And so what that meant for me is even if I didn't get to see all of the other cards from the set, he was letting me know that the grades of these cards, of the stars, was indicative of the rest of the set. So in actuality, not only did those cards being graded bring a little bit of additional value to those cards, but it actually allowed me to do my job more easily and evaluate, assess, and appraise his sets on the blind without seeing them in person. And then when we made a deal in principle, all I had to do when I went out there was really just verify everything, not just the graded cards, but the balance of the sets. And it made my job a lot more easy to do with some of those key cards being graded. And in that case, those cards may have brought just a little bit more value being graded, but they brought a lot more value to me as the set whole with those cards made it a lot easier to figure out what I had in my hands.